On a quiet evening in 1974, in the small town of Holcomb, Kansas, an entire family was found brutally murdered in their own home. The Clutter family, known for their kindness and strong community ties, were the last people anyone expected to become victims of such a heinous crime. But what truly shook the town was the motive, or rather, the lack of one. What happened that night, and why does this case still haunt true crime enthusiasts to this day? This is the terrifying and true story of the Clutter family murders. The Clutters were a well-respected family. Herbert Clutter was a successful farmer, known for his fairness and work ethic. His wife, Bonnie, was a quiet woman who had long struggled with bouts of depression and anxiety. Despite her struggles, she was deeply devoted to her family. Their teenage children, Nancy and Kenyon, were bright, well-loved by friends and teachers alike. Nancy was a star student and a talented musician, while Kenyon enjoyed working on mechanical projects. From the outside, they were the picture of rural prosperity and stability. But on November 15, 1959, their world was shattered. Richard Hickok and Perry Smith were two men from vastly different backgrounds, yet both had led troubled lives. Hickok had been a promising student until a car accident left him with permanent facial injuries and a changed personality. He drifted into a life of petty crime and fraud. Smith, on the other hand, endured a horrific childhood of abuse and neglect. His mother was an alcoholic, and his father was violently unstable. He had spent time in orphanages where he was frequently beaten. The two men met in prison, where they bonded over their disdain for authority and their belief that they were meant for something greater. While incarcerated, Hickok heard from a fellow inmate about a wealthy farmer named Herbert Clutter, who supposedly kept a safe filled with cash in his home. After their release, Hickok convinced Smith to join him in robbing the Clutter family. Their plan was simple: break in, steal the money, and leave no witnesses. But things did not go according to plan. That evening, Hickok and Smith drove hundreds of miles to reach the Clutter home. They parked their car some distance away to avoid suspicion and approached the house quietly. With the door unlocked, they entered without resistance. Once inside, they woke Herbert Clutter and demanded he take them to the safe. When he insisted there was no such thing, they tied him up and searched the home. As the minutes turned to hours, tension built. The killers realized there was no fortune to be found. What happened next was pure horror. Herbert Clutter was taken to the basement, where his throat was slashed before he was shot execution style. Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon were each shot in their beds, silenced before they could even scream. What made the crime even more chilling was the methodical nature in which it was carried out. The killers spent time in the house before the murders, searching for the non-existent fortune and leaving behind chilling evidence of their presence. Half-eaten food on the kitchen counter, cigarette ashes on the floor, and even a boot print near the back door. They left behind very few physical clues, but the brutality of the murders stunned investigators. The crime scene was puzzling. There were no signs of a struggle, no clear indication of a break-in, and nothing valuable was taken, except for a few dollars from Herbert's wallet. The brutality of the crime left investigators with more questions than answers. Word of the killings spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. The Clutter family was well respected and had no known enemies. Detectives combed through possible suspects but found no immediate leads. The lack of evidence made it seem like the killers had vanished without a trace. Then, a tip came in. A former cellmate of Hickok's came forward, revealing that Hickok had spoken about robbing the Clutters, convinced they had a fortune hidden in their home. The lead was enough to put investigators on their trail. During the investigation, forensic evidence played a key role. Footprints at the scene matched the shoes Hickok and Smith had been wearing. Authorities also discovered a shotgun shell that matched the weapon used in the crime, linking it back to the suspects. 6 weeks later, Hickok and Smith were arrested in Las Vegas. Their confession sent chills down the spines of even the most seasoned detectives. Smith admitted to pulling the trigger, but the crime was the result of both their twisted minds, one desperate for money, the other craving violence. Both men described the night in shocking detail. They had initially planned to tie the family up and escape after finding the money, but when it became clear there was no fortune, things turned deadly. Smith later claimed he felt remorse, while Hickok remained cold and indifferent. The trial of Hickok and Smith was one of the most sensationalized cases of the decade. Journalists from across the country flocked to cover it, and the courtroom was filled with horrified spectators. The defense attempted to argue that Smith had suffered from a troubled childhood and severe mental instability, while Hickok had merely been a follower. It didn't matter. The jury found them both guilty, and in 1965, both men were executed by hanging at the Kansas State Penitentiary. The Clutter family massacre left a lasting impact on the town of Holcomb. It was a crime that seemed senseless, a brutal reminder that evil can strike anywhere, even in the most peaceful places. Many in Holcomb struggled to move on, with some residents leaving town, unable to live with the memories of what had happened. The Clutter farmhouse stood abandoned for years, becoming an eerie symbol of the town's darkest moment. This case became the basis for Truman Capote's groundbreaking book In Cold Blood, forever immortalizing the tragedy. Capote's work not only brought the case to international attention, but also sparked discussions about the nature of crime and justice. Decades later, the case remains one of the most chilling examples of random violence. The psychological profiles of the killers, the tragic innocence of the victims, and the sheer brutality of the crime continue to fascinate criminologists and true crime enthusiasts alike. Even today, Holcomb has never quite forgotten that horrific night. The once thriving Clutter farm remains a ghostly reminder of the town's darkest chapter. Some say that strange occurrences still happen near the abandoned house. Flickering lights, distant screams, and eerie whispers carried by the wind. Whether these are simply local legends or something more supernatural, one thing is certain: the memory of the Clutter family will never fade. If you enjoyed this terrifying true crime story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more chilling tales. And remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that walk among us. Sleep tight if you can.